I certainly agree that the way in which human beings are interacting with nature and the values that we hold in that regard is not okay. It's destructive, it is human-centric, and it is certainly not what I am advocating for at all. I was certainly very much advocating for a wild animal-focused approach to this issue. But the thing that I was advocating for was individual focus, which is what we as humans want. When we talk about balance, this is talking about populations and ecosystems, which, while they may have some instrumental value to the individuals that make them up, do not have inherent value. They cannot, as far as I'm concerned. I think the only thing that can have inherent value is a sentient being, because they value themselves. Ecosystems don't value themselves. Animals do not regulate their own populations. Predation and disease and injury and starvation regulate those populations. And so the idea of regulating population with birth control, while that might be used for human ends now, it's more just saying that that technology could be applied if we're feeding hungry animals and we're treating sick animals, which I really don't think it's a huge leap to assume that if we know a chicken doesn't want to be in a cage, we know a deer doesn't want to starve to death, then I think the birth control would be to take care of it on the back end. Because one issue that's often raised is if you feed hungry animals and you treat sick animals, you will have population growth that will be unmanageable. So essentially it would be replacing what nature does and keeping it at that same level. And we could certainly act in a way where we are too confident with the information that we have and make a mistake. But I also think, again, that once we have information, like we are beings that have a advanced capacity to understand and affect our environment, and that can be very bad, but it can be very good. And if we choose to do nothing when we could do something, I think that's still a choice. And it might be the right choice, it might be the wrong choice, but I think we have to view it as an option versus the morally neutral default. And I definitely think also that we have happily moved away from having those things regulate our populations. I don't think any of us are eager to have our populations be regulated by starvation and disease, and at least obviously in the developed world we don't deal with that so much. It still is happening to human beings everywhere, all over the world too, and that's a problem. We have had to take risks with a limited amount of information in complicated systems like the human body, with medicine, economics, and did those things to try to make the world better. And we've made mistakes. But I don't think anyone thinks we shouldn't still try to have medicine or feed the hungry or anything like that. So I think it's the same idea, which is that we have to act as we can with the information we have for the benefit of as many as we can. But I completely hear the concerns, and I think they're very valid.
Well, and thank you for this discussion. It's really engaging.
Yeah.
And
I just want us to talk about it more.
Yeah.
I agree. Yes.
Even when we assume a situation where there's no predation, there's no competition for resources, I think Darwinian evolution has produced brains and psyches that are, inherently neurotic. If you are an animal that is preyed on in the wild, let's say you take away all the predators, you still have this psychic, I would say like a lingering trauma inherent in your species you're not happy. It's not, oh, now I have no predators, I have plenty of food, now I'm happy. I think to be a naked mole rat or a gazelle or whatever is kind of an awful existence, even if you remove those things because of the evolutionary conditioning, if you will, to be like a neurotic being. So I hope I'm not offending people when I say this, but I just think it would be better if these animals did not exist until you could get to the point where, say, you genetically engineer them to be happy, get rid of the neuroses. If we had every human on the planet being born with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, any number of horrible maladies that affect the human mind, we would say, hey, we need to get a handle on this. Let's not just have freely reproducing people who are just cranking out tons of children that have bipolar and schizophrenia. So
Yeah.
I think, it's like the Bob Barker, the Price is Right thing, spay and neuter your animals, and why not do that with wild populations until maybe we could make them happy? Why can't we have animal Prozac or, much more sophisticated pharmacological interventions to make them blissful and happy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a very valid point. I mean, if you were to if you've ever cared for rabbits or goats, one of the first things you'll learn, like packaged entirely with how you interact with these animals for their own benefit, is that they are prey animals and that they are easily scared. Rabbits can have heart attacks just from being scared. That's certainly not something that we would want to continue. And I think that when it's phrased in that way, it can sound like a lot. But I think that, yes, as we go forward, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to think about ways to make animals happier. Even if you were to remove these pressures, to have them be able to enjoy their lives, which are now hopefully less likely to contain injury and starvation and such things. Yes, Margaret.
I applauded when you mentioned the Wild Bird Fund, because they're the only organization in the city that actually cares about pigeons.
Yes.
And New York City is very disappointing to me as far as the thought or the lack of thought that it gives to its wildlife. The pigeons, the squirrels, the rats. And I'm really very ashamed of the city. I'm a close observer of their suffering, and I do everything that I can within my means to alleviate the suffering of the wildlife in my area. I feed the squirrels in the park in a certain range, and I have various flocks of pigeons, and there's an awful lot. I give dinner to a rat family every night that lives in a sewer near me. So I do what I can to alleviate the suffering, but there's virtually no help. The city depletes everything that they have. They have no food, they have no water. I'm rescuing pigeons all the time who suffer from lead poisoning because they're so thirsty, there's no water, there's nothing for them. They find any little bit of water that inevitably is contaminated with detergents and gasoline, and of course they end up with lead poisoning. I'm rescuing them all the time, bringing them up to the Wild Bird Fund, which is a great resource. But this kind of suffering shouldn't have to go on as it does in the city. And this new proposed law of no feeding of wildlife, they might as well just say, we are a cruel city. We want our wildlife to die of starvation, to die of thirst. We are a heartless city. We care only about money.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, my two boys, the pigeons I adopted, were both lead poisoned as babies and have mild neurological issues as a result, which is why they were deemed unreleasable, and I was able to adopt them. I think that the populations of animals that have completely woven themselves into our living, especially in highly developed urban centers like New York City, are a population we could very quickly and manageably start to help. I think that you're completely right. These animals depend on the city and on us as much as any of us do. And an example of, I think, what was being mentioned before, where animals are blamed for something humans do. Pigeon poop takes care of itself. If it's in the dirt and forest, it's only when it builds up on human structures that it presents a health issue. So the city should be power washing their metal and cement structures. We could, imagine if it wasn't just the Wild Bird Fund and a couple of concerned folks that know what to look for in sick birds. Imagine if the city had a program where they used tax money to send qualified people out to de-string pigeon feet and treat them for parasites and bring them in and give them rehab. This is something that is totally manageable, and I think within an ethic of caring about animals and about the world.
A lot of European cities are building pigeon lofts on top of buildings and for pigeons to be housed and protected and fed at the city's expense.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Are there similar programs that they do for rats, like how to, because I know there's horrible proposals in New York and all the time about killing all the rats. Are there other proposals for how to manage rat populations?
I think someone's birth control is in development.
Yeah, there's birth control in the works, but it's really hard to give wild animals birth control because the best way for animals like rats is giving it to them in like an oral form, and then you risk other animals eating it, basically. And so it creates all this like complex, it's hard to predict what the outcomes will be. But they're tested. I think we have a birth control that works for rats that's oral, but they don't have a good way to administer it, basically. Yeah. But we're trying.
Yeah, well, hopefully that could eventually replace the poison that's being fed right now.
Or like blue traps, or like these awful. I mean,
Yeah.
the ways that rats are killed currently is like incredibly unpleasant. And I think there's probably like billions of rats in the world's cities, and that's like a huge, probably like one of the worst ways to die. They're either poisoned or starved to death in traps. Yeah.
Yes.
In terms of affecting city policy towards all these different things, just for people to know, 10 o'clock on every Friday, Mayor de Blasio is on WNYC program every Friday at 10 called Ask the Mayor. And I'm always calling up, you have to stay on and keep redialing or whatever, or call before 10 o'clock. But these issues can be presented, and he does take them seriously. The other issue I wanted to mention is I think we shouldn't forget this little minor detail called capitalism, which of course did start with humans separating ourselves from the other animals and measuring wealth by the heads of cattle per capita around 10,000 years ago. And also to keep in mind that capitalist system, the bottom line is profit and shareholder dividends increasing, and it doesn't matter how many people are killed, animals are killed, planet destroyed.
Right.
We are in the sixth mass extinction of all life on planet Earth. They will keep on because they're governed by laws. That gives us also the opportunity to merge and link and collaborate with all the other human beings to join with groups fighting against racism and sexism and ageism and the prison industrial complex and the meat, military, medical, media complex as well, just offering that.
Absolutely.
Oh, one more quick thing.
Yes.
You mentioned medicine a lot and, controlling animals through Prozac. I mean, I think we should get as far away from the pharmaceutical industry and the meta-kill industries because they are controlled by these huge, large mega corporations. And their bottom line is exactly the same, which is profit above people and planet and panda bears, etc. I think that the main healing process for, ADD and, anxiety and trauma is other than these drugs, which usually have tremendous side effects, I know from my personal experience. So just something to think about. It's not the end all and be all.
That's a pretty big issue, I think, probably to discuss another time. I mean, I happen to be a believer in evidence-based medicine. I think that there are some serious flaws with the medical system that we have, especially in the United States right now. But I think that there are much more socialist countries out there that give access to evidence-based medicine and proper care. And I think that that's obviously not the only thing. There's lots of complementary therapies and general outlooks on life and practices and eating and exercise that affect one's health as well. But I certainly don't feel like we should not look in what science has shown us about what we can do to improve and save lives. But that's a really big issue to discuss.
I can give you a lot of evidence base against it.
All right. Yes, Danielle.
Something I'd like to add to that, to some of those points, and I think it really underpins the entire conversation, is that underlying all of this is the structures that our societies are in right now. Nancy, you already mentioned the capitalist system. Chris, earlier in the discussion, talked about how everything is really extractive. Basically the key into how we interact with the environment around us is extractive, is destructive. And who we value and how we value lives is really the problem here. So even in terms of being concerned about the pharmaceutical industry and other industries that do have impacts on our natural environment and do intervene with it, the question to ask, I think, is what's underlying those industries? Even the fact that the word is industry, it's economic-based interests But if we had a society that valued different things, that valued maybe compassion, valued ethics, valued individuals, we wouldn't see these industries, these technologies used in these horrific, destructive, extractive ways. Some of the activism I actually do is with Science for the People, and we're a science advocacy organization concerned with the intersection science has and how it's put to use with society and the impacts of that. A lot of funding for science, for different kinds of science innovations and technologies does come from the military. It comes from other destructive places in our society, but that doesn't mean that the scientists who start having an interest in this work, that get involved in this work, had the intention for their work to be used that way. Just unfortunately in our social strata, that's where the money is made. So I think it's a little bit too simplified to describe it as just automatically that us intervening and us creating technologies is inherently bad. I think that actually feeds into this notion that we're separate or elevated from the natural world. Because truthfully, yes, we're creating artificial medicines or these artificial things, but we're just a product of the natural world. Nothing we create on the world wouldn't have, it exists on the world because it is a natural thing. It's a natural occurrence in some way. We created it by manipulating nature in certain ways or changing in a unique way what we're doing, but it still is something that is manifesting before us in our natural world. So this idea that any intervention we have is automatically incorrect or inappropriate or unnatural is something to actually question, because we're here and we're gonna engage with nature and have an impact on nature no matter what we do. So what's the harm in it being with a mindset of seeking to reduce suffering, seeking to help others, the same way we kind of try to structure our communities. When you walk around in your community, the idea is when you walk through a door, you just hold it afterwards because there's probably someone after you. What if we had that same approach when we're walking in the park and you see animals running around in the park, instead of we shouldn't intervene, we shouldn't do anything, we should be hands off and trust that the environment here is going to take care of itself. Part of that trust is that we partake and participate in that care. I think that's another way of framing this that would be really helpful for this conversation.
I agree. Thank you, Danielle. That was very well put.
I just want to say the question is how far, how much, and with what intent do we intervene? And I think ultimately, when there is hubris underlying our intervention, whether it's in one direction or the other, like meaning in one direction is let's kill all the rats, and in the other direction might be let's feed all the rats. In either case, it's still on our part a control. It's a we're gonna fix it. We messed it up, we're gonna fix it. And I think that there's a certain measure of that that's necessary, and a certain measure of that we need to be able to question in ourselves. A certain measure of humility that we have to bring to those controls that we usurp. I mean, obviously, if you see someone suffering, whether that someone is a human or other being, you want to help. So that's nature. That's nature helping. You know, to me, that is nature.
Yeah.
But when we talk about, you know, I'm sorry to say this, but when we say that an animal is neurotic, that's us putting our, you know, anthropocentric notion onto an animal. It may seem to us like it's neurotic, but we don't know. We don't.
Well,
and even if we did know, that's us saying it, not the rabbit saying it. Do you know what I mean? Not the rabbit saying, "Oh, I'm freaking out, help me." It's us seeing that and putting it on them. So I think that's to me the root and the key issue that I see in pretty much every animal rights realm, whether it be animals used for entertainment, for animals used for, you know, wild animals, animals used for circuses, experiments, etc. It's in every one of those cases. The thing that I've been seeing lately that has opened my eyes is that we see ourselves somehow as in charge of everything, and we're not in charge. There's a difference between a permaculture approach and an in-charge approach, and even permaculture can be sometimes a little in charge, you know?
That's
So
right. We're organizing that, so that's an intervention like any other.
Absolutely.
and that's okay. I'm a very big fan of the work being done, especially in veganic permaculture. I think that's going to be an essential part of creating a sustainable food system in the future.
No, it's not an anti-interventionist approach. It's an intervention it's like creating systems that end up being somewhat self-sustained, right? Because you're using, you're mimicking systems that exist in various ecosystems, but it's designed with human and animal needs in mind.
I think that's
so
awesome.
It is a design, but I think most permaculturists are pretty low tech in their approach.
Sure.
I mean, I'm personally skeptical of high tech approaches, but I thought that Danielle said it so well. The values through which we use technology, permaculture is a technology as well, to be certain. I think to think that it's not a technology is not correct either. If we define technology only as something that is some kind of mechanical, like a computer versus a technology is like a tool that we are using to change our reality. So permaculture is a kind of technology that looks maybe different than the computer, but
absolutely. And I think that it's important to realize that right now we don't have like a government or a culture trying to approach a food system. There are kind of two, right? There's the mainstream unchecked industrial agriculture, which uses any new technology that it can, but to the end of being as extractive and profitable as possible. And then you've got certain labels like organic or whatever, which just say like, well, if it's natural, then it's good, and we just draw this sort of sharp line, which is actually really fuzzy and poorly regulated if you look at the laws. I know permaculture is different from that, but as like a general basis. But really what we need to be doing is looking at what techniques are the best for the world, for us, for other animals, for using everything the most efficiently, and using a combination. There is a healthful, holistic approach, I think, that can take the best of what we can invent and combine it with the best of what we've learned from the natural world. I want to address what was said before. I think there's an interesting duplicity here that I've come across a few times where animal advocacy rests on us having some idea what's going on in the heads of other animals. So it seems to me a little inconsistent that we can know that chickens don't want to be in cages, but we can't know that deer would prefer to not have to be in a constant state of frightened vigilance because they have been conditioned to be so, because they might get torn apart at any given moment. I think we can know. I think that that's what empathy is. I think that's one of the few inherently good things about our species, which is that we can empathize with anything. I am a puppeteer. My job is to make people empathize with inanimate objects, and that's, I think, a beautiful thing that our species is almost unique in being able to go that far, with being able to say that person, that thing, that other, that being is like me. And I think that, sure, we can be wrong, but I don't think that it's a thing we can't know or think about or address. I think that animal advocacy rests on it, and that we can apply that to anyone. That's something interesting to think about anyway.
I don't wanna play in your yard. I don't like you anymore. You'll be sorry when you see me sliding down my cellar door. You can't holler down my rain barrel. You can't climb my apple tree. I don't wanna play in your yard if you won't be good to me.